You guys for showing up to the Seahawk Boys Fearless and Stupid NFL channel on YouTube. I'm your host, Seahawk Boy Mike Barra, usually along with Seahawk Boy Dave Barra, rarely with Seahawk Boy Dave Barra. But we're back here to do another video to talk about what's going on with the Seahawks leading into the NFL draft. I've been getting a few clever comments on various different channels. I actually mirror this show to a bunch of different channels, but I would appreciate it if you would like and subscribe to the Seahawk Boys channel here on YouTube, and also follow me on Seahawk Boy Mike on Twitter. And those links are in the description below to the video. So it's great to have you here. And I've been getting I get a lot of comments. Oh, this is a great channel for people who don't know anything about football, which, by the way, is not an argument. And clearly I know a lot more about football than you do, because if you don't think the Seahawks need to make quarterback priority one, you're a dumb shit. So that's just the reality of the situation. And it's really interesting because yesterday some cool stuff happened that we're going to talk about. But today I want to focus on one thing and one thing only. Part of the delusion that goes on in Seahawks media, Seahawks Twitter, Seahawks YouTube is, oh, well, the Seahawks has done a great job in these last two drafts. And the reality is the Seahawks have not done a great job in the last two drafts. They have not had two great drafts in a row. And we're going to break down that history as we go through the show today. The fact is, they did not have a great draft in 2022, and they did not have a great draft in 2023. They just sucked less than the 7 drafts before that. All right, we're back. Great to have you guys with me. And, the reality is that there is this delusion out there that the Seahawks are back on track, that they're drafting well again, that they know what they're doing. And that was even expressed yesterday in a video that I'm going to actually highly recommend. Yesterday, Rob Staten did a video with Jeff Simmons and said, it was titled, "What Will the Seahawks Do in the 2024 NFL Draft?" And it's a really excellent video to watch because they go through all these position players. And about 30 to 40 minutes in, they get into a really interesting discussion on the quarterback situation. They discuss the fact that, John Schneider really loves DK Metcalf. We had a video yesterday where it was suggested by some outside people that DK Metcalf be traded. I merely commented on it. I didn't advocate for a second that the Seahawks trade DK Metcalf. What I want them to do is to go get a quarterback who can get the ball to DK Metcalf on a consistent basis in Ryan Grubb's new offense, and that guy would clearly be Michael Penix Jr. Now, would I take Jaden Daniels? Would I take Caleb Williams? Not over Penix. Penix is the best deep ball thrower in this draft. I hear that Jaden Daniels is. I think that's East Coast bias. Penix is amazing, and I've seen him play live. I've seen him throw the ball deep live here in Vegas at Allegiant Stadium. You actually have to see it to appreciate how phenomenally good this guy is at throwing the ball deep to a big, talented receiver like DK Metcalf, who bears a striking resemblance to Rome Odunze. And that's what Rob and Jeff talked about yesterday. And Simmons, I normally don't rate Simmons much. I don't pay much attention to him. But he did a really excellent job yesterday of breaking down scenarios, talking about players, guys that he knows, guys that he likes, why he likes them. And this is an excellent watch. After you get done watching this podcast, you should definitely slide over and listen to this Rob Staten podcast. And basically, Rob repeated everything on his blog today, Seahawks Draft Blog, in an article he did. But it's funny because they just don't want to face the reality. The reality is the Seahawks should be drafting a quarterback with this pick, and that quarterback probably should be Michael Penix. Now, if they have to trade, they were like, well, I'm not excited about trading out of 16 to 24 and 27. Then they made the argument that, hey, there's not even a guarantee they're going to find anything worth trading down for. They might get a 3rd round pick on it, talking about how the Packers are not going to give them, let's say, a 2nd and a 3rd to move up from 25 to 16. to get a guy that's not really going to necessarily be any better than the guy they're going to get at 25. In fact, if they're going to trade, they're probably going to trade up ahead of the Seahawks to get a better player. Now, Staten loves Felice Fuaga, and he loves and Tony Fatanu, and he wants them for the Seahawks. So do I. If we had multiple first-round picks, I'd be trying to make a way for that to happen, but not over their quarterback, not over what they need, which is the quarterback of the future. So I'm going to have to say that from where I stand, I think they're not coming to grips with the reality that a quarterback is very much in play for the Seattle Seahawks in with the 16th pick in the draft. And if not, they can trade down and pivot to another position, or they can pivot to another quarterback. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today. But first, what I want to do is I want to go through this stuff that's been going on. And again, go over to what will the Seahawks do in the 2024 NFL draft. I want to go back to my initial point, which is that there is this delusion in Seahawk land, in Seahawks Twitterverse and Seahawks YouTubeverse, that the Seahawks have done a real great job the last 2 years after all these terrible drafts in a row. And the fact is they haven't. These last 2 drafts just sucked less than the previous 7. So what I want to do is kind of go back over the previous 7 and just see where the Seahawks went wrong and then discuss whether or not we can think that we might get something different. We might get something different. We might get something better with the John Schneider led Seattle Seahawks as opposed to the John Schneider, Pete Carroll led Seattle Seahawks. So again, let's just take a quick look here at the 2024 draft, because this is where the wheels started to come off. Up until then, 2010, 2011, 2012, actually they started to come off in 2013. But those first 3 drafts, as many people have pointed out, and as I pointed out in 2013, 2014, yeah, Pete did a great job drafting guys, Richard Sherman and guys like Bobby Wagner, and of course John Schneider wanted Russell Wilson and KJ Wright and Walter Thurman, but these were all guys that he recruited or coached against in college when he was at USC. That's true of Earl Thomas. That's true of Percy Harvin, who they traded for in 2013 and who honestly put them into the Super Bowl and had a great Super Bowl game. Do they win the Super Bowl without Percy Harvin? Possibly. But I'll tell you what, people forget Percy Harvin's kick returns brought them back from the brink of defeat against the Minnesota Vikings in that season. And without that win at home over the Vikings, a game they were losing late in the third quarter, without Percy Harvin breaking big plays, they might not have the home field advantage, and they might not have even made it to the 2013 Super Bowl. So keep all these things in mind. Now, some things happened also which is that Scott McCloughan left the team in 2013. He was forced out by John Schneider because he had a drinking problem. He didn't show up for work on time, but McCloughan may have had a big influence on who the Seattle Seahawks took in 2010, 2011, and 2012, which is when their Super Bowl team was built. 2013, they made some mistakes, but in 2014, the wheels begin to really fall off the whole Seahawks wagon. And this is when they were able to stay competitive for a few more years, but this is when things really got bad. Now, in terms of the departures in free agency, they lost Brandon Browner. They couldn't pay him. Breno Giacomini, the right tackle, they couldn't pay him. Maragos, Clinton McDonald was a good player, but Golden Tate and Walter Thurman were gone. So as we went into this draft, our biggest needs were probably wide receiver to replace Golden Tate, who had been a huge influence on winning that Super Bowl, and getting another corner to play in the Legion of Boom. Although we did have Jeremy Lane coming up, so I don't think they sweated losing Walter Thurman too much. So let's look at what they did. The Seahawks traded down repeatedly out of their first round pick If you look at the 2014 NFL draft in its entirety, the Seahawks first traded out of the uh, let's see, 32nd pick, the championship pick. They traded out to get a second and fourth round selection, 40th and 108 from Minnesota. In doing so, they then, traded down from 40 out with Buffalo or with Detroit. They got a fifth round selection and Detroit second, fourth, and seventh round selection. So they traded down to the 45th pick. Their number one need was wide receiver. And who did they take? They took Paul Richardson, a slight, small, what is he? Like he was like 5'10, 5'11, 6 feet, and 180 pounds. Now, I'm just gonna let you know, I ran into Paul Richardson during his rookie training camp. I was at the Fry's Electronics in Renton, and he was standing right next to me talking to his girlfriend, I guess, wherever this girl was. And he was a lot smaller than I am. He was a little guy. He was a tiny little dude who didn't look like he could take a hit in the NFL. I know I couldn't. And I'm like looking at this guy going, I'm not wild about this. I want a football player to be bigger than me. Now, given that they needed a wide receiver, look at who they passed on. They took Paul Richardson over Devontae Adams, who went 53rd to the Packers. Devontae Adams, of course, is a superstar, a multiple-time Pro Bowler and first-team All-Pro. He's going to the Hall of Fame. They also passed on Allen Robinson, a guy that I know my brother Dave, Seahawk boy Dave, absolutely loved. He was taller and faster than most receivers in the league. But they went with Paul Richardson because, as I recall, according to John Schneider, we went for the guy who could take the top off the defenses. Oh, great. Paul Richardson, of course, was pretty much a bust. He was injured consistently as he had been in college. He was a huge mistake, and the Seahawks blew this pick completely. Now, their second round pick was Justin Britt at number 64. They needed a right tackle because they had moved on from Breno Giacomini. They just couldn't afford to pay him with their cap situation. They brought him in to play right tackle. He played right tackle his first year. He wasn't very good at it, so they moved him inside to guard, and then they moved him inside to center. And finally, after 5, 6, 7 years, they just gave up on Britt. Britt was an okay player, had an okay career, but they could have done other things. They also, for instance, could have taken, I don't know, Trey Turner, all-pro guard, multiple Pro Bowl guard, plugged him in, let's say, at left guard, and then moved their current left guard, James Carpenter, who was originally drafted as a right tackle, back to where they intended to play him in the first place at right tackle, and said, James, lose some weight, play right tackle. The rest of their draft was not really embarrassing, but not really very good. Cassius Marsh, defensive end / linebacker, 34 linebacker, 43 defensive end, special teams player, had a few sacks here and there. Kevin Norwood, another wide receiver, indicating that it's clear that they knew that their number one need was wide receiver. Think about this. They could have had Devontae Adams in the second round, and probably Paul Richardson, given his injury history, would have lasted to 123. So again, they completely overdrafted a guy that they could have gotten in the third, fourth, or fifth round. Kevin Norwood, of course, was a complete stiff. He didn't do anything. Kevin Pierre-Louis, linebacker, played a couple years, made a lot of mistakes, cost him some games. They moved on from him. They could have had Telvin Smith if they wanted a linebacker. They could have had Aaron Lynch. They could have had a lot of different guys. They didn't get a center, Corey Linsley. There's lots of good players they could have taken. They took Jimmy Satin at defensive tackle. He was also a stiff. And basically just ended up, Garrett Scott was a stiff, just guy after guy. Eric Pinkins was a guy that Pete absolutely loved and hung on to and never did anything. So this draft was basically a complete bust. They got one average starter in Justin Britt. They never really found a position for him, ended up letting him go after his second contract. Paul Richardson was a marginal contributor. The only plays Paul Richardson ever made was when Russell Wilson was scrambling around behind the line of scrimmage and he got open because guys left him to go chase Russ. That's the only time Paul Richardson ever made a play. He couldn't get away from coverage. He just simply couldn't get away from coverage. And again, they could have had Devontae Adams, who's going to the Hall of Fame. All right, then we switch forward to the 2015 draft. 2015 draft, they did pretty good with their first two picks, Frank Clark and Tyler Lockett. With their first two picks, they drafted Clark. They traded down. They got to 63. They took a chance on Clark. They could have taken him maybe in the first round, but they traded down, got him, and then traded back up and took Tyler Lockett. Lockett was taken as a kick returner, turned out to be a much better receiver. So they went really, really looked good there. After that, they took Terry Poole, bust. Mark Lewinsky played a number of years in the NFL, but he only played good when he was with other teams because the Seahawks coaching was so bad. Ty Smith, Obum Gwacham, Christian Sokoli, Ryan Murphy, bust, 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 bust. So won a couple of Pro Bowlers with the first two picks. That's not a horrible draft. And the reality is, if you only get your first pick right each and every draft, you will have a Super Bowl team in 3 or 4 years. There's just no way around it. Then in 2016, again, their needs were fairly obvious, but when they came to the draft, they reached. In 2016, they needed a right tackle because Justin Britt had failed as a right tackle. However, they should have simply moved him back there. Instead, they reached for Jermaine Ifedi. Now, their other biggest need after they lost Brandon Mebane and Bruce Irvin off the defensive line area. The guy that they really needed to do was to get a defensive tackle. So they did trade up and take Jaron Reed, but there is also something you need to look at in the 2016 draft. If they had simply said, look, our top needs are right tackle on offense or defensive tackle on defense, if they had simply gone with their number 2 need instead of their number 1 need, I wonder who they could have gotten for that pick at 31, which they burned on Jermaine Ifedi. Oh, how about Chris Jones? How about the best defensive tackle in the NFL in the last 5 years? Don't at me with Aaron Donald. Chris Jones has been better than Aaron Donald for the last 5 years. Now imagine this if they had a different thought process. Imagine Chris Jones here, and you still trade up and take Jaron Reed. Imagine that defensive line for the next 5 years. CJ Prosise couldn't stay healthy, made a few plays. Nick Vanette, bust as a tight end. Reese Odiambo, bust on the offensive line. Quentin Jefferson hung on way too long, played 5 or 6 years with the Seahawks. Hung on way too long. Alex Collins, okay running back, had a couple of good seasons. Joey Hunt, nah. Kenny Lawler, bust. Zach Brooks, bust. So if you're going to grade these drafts, they're not very good. Now we go to 2017. 2017 is the disaster draft. It's the catastrophe draft. If I took over as owner, let's say, of the Seahawks, the first thing I'd say is I want to see every draft board that you have. I want to see our boards from 2017 forward. Why? Well, because 2017 is where it all really, really began to fall apart. Not only did we sign Blair Walsh as a kicker, which was a joke, but we traded down multiple times. This is where it gets really horrible. So we're sitting there. The Seahawks are sitting there at 26, and they're looking to sort of replenish their pass rush a little bit. They traded out of it to get a first, a third, and a seventh. So they traded down in the first round to get a third and a seventh. In doing so, they passed on TJ Watt, the best pass rusher in the NFL for the last 5 years. So they could have had TJ Watt if they'd have just stick and pick at 26. Then they traded down again to number 31 and passed on, Ryan Ramczyk and Cam Robinson at a time when their starting left tackle was nobody. Okung had left. They could have used Cam Robinson. And they traded down to 35 eventually and passed on Buda Baker to take Malik McDowell. Now, if in 2016 they had taken Chris Jones and traded up for Jaron Reed, they wouldn't need Malik McDowell. They'd have everything they need inside. And they could have taken, oh, I don't know, a great player like Buda Baker, something like that. But they passed on him to take Malik McDowell, who was a stiff. Then they got all excited and waited on Ethan Posick. Oh, they were just desperate. John said they were desperate to get to Ethan Posick, desperate that he would survive till they picked it at 58. Well, he survived to 58, and they got their wish. And in doing so, they passed on, I don't know, Juju Smith-Schuster, Alvin Kamara, and Cooper Kupp. Imagine Russell Wilson throwing to Cooper Kupp instead of having Ethan Posich mix blocks for him. And they got Shaquille Griffin in the third round, had an okay season or two, pretty much out of the league now. I think he signed a one-year deal with somebody. Delano Hill, stiff. Naz Jones, I thought could play, but he got in the doghouse for some reason and they got rid of him. Amara Darbo, stiff. Tedrick Thompson, stiff. Mike Tyson, stiff. Justin Senior, stiff. David Moore played a couple of good years, and Chris Carson had some productive years and was an outstanding talent, but could not stay healthy. We all knew he couldn't stay healthy because he wasn't healthy in college. So they took a flyer on him in the 7th round and almost got lucky, but eventually his career was cut short. The worst of these picks is Amara Darbo. Why? Because if you look at their departures, and guys that they let go, they let their tight end go. They had like Jimmy Graham, they had traded for. They had him on a 1 year left on his deal. So they needed a tight end. Now, who could they have taken with that pick? And they even said, Schneider said after the draft, well, we really wanted a tight end, but we just couldn't find a pick for him. Amara Darbo was a complete stiff. You even look at his college tape, he couldn't get open. He couldn't get any separation from guys. And they were so excited to have him. They had to fucking have Amara Darbo. They could have had George Kittle for that pick. So again, this draft is just pathetically, terribly awful. All right. Now we move on to 2018. And this is again an example of Pete likes to surprise people. Pete likes to shock people. Pete got off in the 2012 draft when he picked Bruce Irvin, and everybody criticized him for it. Everybody went crazy and said, "Oh, that Pete Carroll, he's crazy." Look at all the attention Pete Carroll got for that. So he's been trying to repeat that consistently. So what the Seahawks did was they took a running back who's not even as good as Nick Chubb, a running back they could have also had at that pick, trying to make a big splash. Yeah, they made a big splash. Unfortunately, Penny didn't. He was not even a starter, really, sort of an average player who looks like he's kind of out of football right now. He went to the Eagles, and he's so bad he didn't even get on the field. Then in the 3rd round, still needing a right tackle because Jermaine Ifedi was a bust, they passed on Orlando Brown, who's been to the Pro Bowl now multiple times, first team All-Pro, playing for the Kansas City Chiefs, to take Rasheem Green. You know why they took Rasheem Green? Because they were rebuilding here. And if you look at Rasheem Green's college tape, he looks a lot like Michael Bennett. Unfortunately, looking like Michael Bennett at the college level as opposed to looking like Michael Bennett at the pro level, they're two completely different things. So again, they're trying to repeat their past glories. Oh, well, this guy reminds me of Michael Bennett. Let's go get him. They should have taken Orlando Brown. Will Disley, guy should have been wasted so much cap space on him the last 2 years. Should have been off the team. And then again, this is another example of them trying to make a splash and get a lot of media attention. They take a guy with one hand, Shaquem Griffin, because his twin brother's on the team. Really nice story. Had some athletic ability. Could have maybe played a little bit as a special teamer, but that's about all he did. Michael Dickinson Michael Dixon, pretty good punter. Jamarco Jones, bust. Jacob Martin has played in the league and gotten a reasonable amount of sacks, 38 or something like that, but he's not a star player. Alex Magoo, complete bust. 2019 draft. Let's take a look at the 2019 draft. Now, this is where, again, things were just really quite awful. Because as you get down to who they took, that 64th pick, that trade up for DK Metcalf, that looks pretty great because he's a star. He's one of our few stars. LJ Collier, complete bust. Marquise Blair, complete bust. Cody Barton, hopefully out of football. Terrible linebacker. And the best part about Cody Barton at 88 is, you know who was still on the board? Max Crosby. But Pete doesn't like white, aggressive, hard-working defensive ends. Pete never drafted a white edge rushing defensive end. He likes the long-arm black guys like LJ Collier. But LJ Collier, unfortunately, couldn't beat me to the quarterback. Gary Jennings Jr. bust. Phil Haynes played a few years. Average. Ugo Amadi, few years. Average. Ben Burkervin, few years as a backup and a special teams guy. Ben Burkervin, special teams. Travis Homer. The guy I love to hate from Miami. Teacher's pet, never did anything. DeMarcus Christmas bust. John Ursua bust. Absolute bust. 2020, of course, things got really bad. They took Jordan Brooks instead of Patrick Queen. Patrick Queen is 10 times the player that Jordan Brooks is. Much better in coverage, much better at everything. They took Brooks. Darrell Taylor, they traded up to get a guy with a rod in his fucking leg. Guess what? He didn't play his rookie year. He's had 1 year with 9 sacks. He's on, I hate to say it, Darrell, his last legs. This is his last chance. Damian Lewis played pretty well at right guard as a rookie. So what did they do? They moved him to left guard, where he was uncomfortable, and now he's going to go play right guard for the Carolina Panthers and make $54 million. Colby Parkinson, average tight end, just cashed in. DJ Dallas, not a guy, just a special teams guy. Alton Robinson, didn't give him a chance, wouldn't let him play. Freddie Swain, bust. Stephen Sullivan, I don't even remember Stephen Sullivan, bust. Sorry, let's go back over those guys. Jordan Brooks, Darrell Taylor, Damian Lewis, Colby Parkinson, DJ Dallas. 2021, of course, was the horrid year. We only had 3 picks. We could have had Creed Humphrey, an all-pro center. But no, Pete and John wanted to get an explosive player. So they took a, 5'8", 170-pound guy who can't take a hit at the NFL level. Complete bust, Dwayne Eskridge. And of course, right after we took Dwayne Eskridge, the Rams took, what's his name? Tutu Atwell, who's like 10 times the player Dwayne Eskridge is, same kind of player. We could have had Creed Humphrey. If Creed Humphrey had been our center, guess what? In 2021, Russell Wilson probably never gets hurt. Because Aaron Donald is not going to push our center right back into his face so his hand hits the top of Aaron Donald's helmet. And he tears a tendon, and even when he comes back, he's not able to play at a high level because he can't grip the football properly. It took Russ 2 to 2.5 years to get over it. I'm not sure he's ever gotten over that injury. But if Creed Humphrey is in there, he doesn't get hurt. Trey Brown had 1 good year. Not too many good years after that. Stone Forsythe is still on the team. So the jury remains out. So if I had to go back over these drafts, 2014, I give it a D. Britt played a few years. Richardson played a few years. But given who they could have had, Devontae Adams, Trey Turner, fuck. It's a D. You look at the 2015 draft. You got to give this a B because they got 3 players, Clark, Lockett, and Glowinski, who played in this league. Glowinski, unfortunately, only played well for other teams, never for us, because our offensive line coaching was so abysmal. But Clark had good years here, as did Tyler Lockett. Still having good years here. 2016, D. D. Because although they got Jaron Reed, everybody else in this draft class was pretty much a bust. Jermaine Ifedi being the biggest bust, and they could have had Chris Jones and Jaron Reed and rebuilt their defense. Imagine how good the Seahawks would be with Jaron Reed and Chris Jones the last 5 or 6 years. 2017 draft. This is an F, an absolute fucking F, not even an E, a flat F. Every single pick was a bust. And given who they could have had, Malik McDowell, instead of Malik McDowell, we could have had TJ Watt, we could have had Cam Robinson, or we could have had Buda Baker. For the Ethan Postage pick, we could have had, I don't know, Alvin Kamara, Cooper Kupp, any number of guys. Imagine if this looked like TJ Watt in the first round, Cooper Kupp in the second round, Shaquille Griffin in the third round, and at 106, George Kittle. This draft's getting an A if that's who we drafted, but we didn't do that. 2018, another D. Flowers was okay. Dixon is still on the team. Penny never lived up to his potential. Green, complete bust, especially considering we could have had Orlando Brown and solved our right tackle problem, which we're still not really fully solved on that one yet. Will Disley, couple of good years, couldn't stay healthy. Shaquem Griffin never made it because he only had one hand. 2019, bust, star, bust, average role player, bust. This is an E, not an F, but an E. The only thing salvaging it is DK Metcalf. And again, they could have had DK. Imagine this draft if they'd have had DK Metcalf and Max Crosby. And I don't know, maybe who's the Packers center at 47? Went to the Pro Bowl multiple times. 2020, again, D. Brooks played a few years, made a lot of tackles, 7 yards behind the line, 7 yards downfield. Darrell Taylor still has some potential, had 1 9-sack year, has to repeat that. Damian Lewis played okay till they moved him out of position. Colby Parkinson contributed a little bit. DJ Dallas contributed a little bit. But DJ Dallas became a problem because they kept trying to force the ball to him because he was teacher's pet. Pete Carroll's teacher's pet, and he wasn't good enough. 2021, D. Eskridge, Trey Brownstone, Forsyth, E. F. They could have had Creed Humphrey with the 56th pick. Forsyth is still on the team, but this will probably be his last year. All right, so that's all the drafts leading up to 2022. Now in 2022, this is supposed to be this great draft that the Seattle Seahawks had. They traded away their problem. They traded away Russell Wilson because he was the problem. Pete was going to prove that he could win without Russ. You know, he got very lucky with Geno Smith's career year. But if you look at that trade, it's not very good. We only have one player of the players left. Drew Lock is gone. Shelby Harris is gone. The only guy we have left is Noah Fant. And Seahawks don't use a tight end. At least they haven't up to this point. But let's look at pick one. Ninth pick in the draft, Charles Cross. He's okay. As Staten pointed out yesterday, he's a finesse left tackle, comes from a passing offense. Average starter. I think he will probably improve to the point that he makes a Pro Bowl or two in his career before it's all over. Boye Mafe, not much in the first season, 3 sacks, 9 in the second season, but he had 8 in the first half of the season and then dropped off like all the way to nothing the second half of the season. He just was really awful. Ken Walker has some star potential, but hasn't really displayed it yet. Hasn't made the Pro Bowl yet and gets injured a lot. Abraham Lucas looked really promising. This is a guy that Rob Staten loved. This is where I begin to really listen to Rob. Um, when he pointed out Lucas had first round talent, he played like that in his rookie year, injured in his second year. It remains to be seen whether he will ever be healthy enough to play consistently at the NFL level. Kobe Bryant, well, you know how John Schneider says we really wanted to take a quarterback the last 2 years, but we just couldn't. Well, yeah, you could. You could have taken Sam Howell. You could have taken Brock Purdy with this pick. Instead, you took Kobe Bryant, who's just a below average defensive back. Tariq Woolen had a Pro Bowl season. Tyreek Smith, Bo Melton, Tariq Young. Not much from them. Not much from them. So, what's the grade on this draft? Right now, it's a C plus or a B minus because Cross and Mafe and Walker and Lucas and Woolen have shown potential. But this is not an A draft. This is not an A plus draft. The only one of these guys who's been to the Pro Bowl is Woolen. And he was an afterthought. They thought Kobe Bryant was better than Tariq Woolen. That's why they drafted him instead of taking a quarterback. So this draft is a B minus C plus. It's not an A. This was not a great draft. This was a better draft than the previous 7, but that ain't saying much. Now we move on to 2023. And in 2023, this was the draft where, after not taking a quarterback in 2022, which was a terrible class to speak of, they could have gotten a quarterback. They could have traded up. They could have traded 520 and this year's first round pick, which you're all upset about. They might spend on Michael Penix, and gotten CJ Stroud with the first pick, but they didn't do that because, Pete and John, they didn't need a quarterback. They had Geno Smith. They didn't need a quarterback like CJ Stroud, who was going to win at least one, if not multiple Super Bowls in his career for the Houston Texans. Imagine being the Houston Texans. You think you got the franchise guy in Deshaun Watson, and you trade him away, and a couple years later, you end up with CJ Stroud. Wow. You parlay Deshaun Watson into CJ Stroud. So they could have also taken Will Levis at 5. They could have taken Will Levis at 20. They passed on Will Levis again. Will Levis, I don't know that he's going to be a superstar, but I think he's going to be a star. He was my QB2 in last year's draft. So let's look at the rest of the draft. Devon Witherspoon had a good year, went to the Pro Bowl, good player, missed about 4 or 5 games with injury. Again, another Seahawks curse. Jackson Smith-Njigba, okay rookie season, was pretty much ignored by the coaching staff. Certainly not as good as, let's say, Puka Nacua, who they could have gotten anywhere in here. Derek Hall, bust. Zach Charbonnet, average backup. Anthony Bradford, below average starter. They had to start him because they didn't have anybody else. Cameron Young, incomplete. Mike Morris, incomplete. Olu Oluwatimi, we're hoping he starts. Jarek Reed, incomplete. Kenny McIntosh didn't even really get on the field. They did get Jake Bobo. So you look at this draft, and it's a C. They got 2 guys that have potential. One guy who maybe has potential, Anthony Bradford. Right now, it's a C plus. It's not even a B. So the last 2 drafts, really, 2022 and 2023, have been a B and a C. 2023, we have to give them some credit for upside. But let's go back and look at 2022. And again, I'm not saying I would have taken different guys in 2022, but none of these guys are stars. Cross is not a star. Maffe's not a star. Walker is not yet a star. Woolen has to show that he can do it 2 years in a row. He hasn't done that yet. In 2023, um, Witherspoon has some star potential. Nobody else has shown any yet. So again, the whole point is that these last two drafts have not been great drafts. They've just sucked less than the seven before them. And I don't think it's realistic. Uh, yeah, 9 years of crap drafts, Glenn. I don't think it's realistic. 2017 was the disaster class, Dave Barra. I don't think it's realistic to expect them to do a great job. After looking at those 19 position players they took, not one quarterback, are you telling me you really have confidence that this regime, John Schneider, with John Schneider running the show, is going to pick more position players and not blow it? I don't have faith in that. And I think you're crazy if you do have faith in that. Absolutely crazy. What this team needs to do is roll the dice, take a big risk, go for a star player, go for a player who's got star quality. And that guy's name is Michael Penix. You can't wait. You can't trust that he's going to make it to 16. You can't trust that he's going to get past the Vikings or the Raiders or even the Broncos, who I don't think he'd be a good fit for, but you never know. Sean Payton may be desperate to save his job. So I say you take our first round pick next year and you jump up and you go get him. And if you think Talise Fuaga or Troy Fatanu or Jared Verse or even Byron Murphy, who might be there at 16, if you think those guys are going to make you bring you 1 inch closer to the Super Bowl compared to Michael Penix, you're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. And it's hilarious to get criticism from people who say, oh, this is a great channel for people who don't know anything about football. Because all you do is listen to all these other dumb shit YouTubers. And I'm not including Rob Staten in that. Hawk Blogger and Seahawks Retard Nelson and Dan Vians. All they do is repeat what they read in the blogosphere and the Twitter sphere and the YouTube sphere, what they hear. None of them are thinking about this logically. Hawk Blogger Numbskuller actually said the other day, well, I think how you build a championship team is you build everything in the trenches and then you go get your quarterback. Oh yeah, because it's so easy to just go get a quarterback that can win you a Super Bowl. It's just so easy. The Seahawks have had multiple chances to draft guys who might win them a Super Bowl in the last 2 years. They've passed on them. Time is now to go ahead and go forward and go get the guy, Penix, who can do it for them. You get the quarterback first and then you build the team around him. That's how everybody else does it. That's how all the successful teams do it. And we're about to find out if John Schneider is as dumb as we think he is, and if John Schneider is the guy who's been behind all of those disaster drafts that we covered for the last 7 years up until 2022. We shall see. But I think that reading the tea leaves, which could be deception, this could be simply John Schneider, deceiving people because he wants to get that offensive lineman. Oh, because that guard is gonna make us a Super Bowl team. This all could be deception, but I have a tendency to think that it's not. I think that they really are looking at quarterbacks. And if they can't make a trade up for Penix, which I do think they're going to look at, and if he doesn't make it to 16, then I think they trade down if they can into the mid to late 20s. And here's what they should do. They should take Spencer Rattler. They absolutely should take Spencer Rattler. RG3 had a very interesting post today that he shared on Twitter. Um, he says, by the way, well, let's go take a look at it real quick. Let's go take a look at it real quick before we kick out of here. Here's RG3 talking about Michael Penix. Let's listen to RG3.
If they can pick Malik Neighbors at number 6 and then wait to number 47 in the draft and they can get a guy like a Michael Penix Jr. there if he falls to there, because I don't think he should fall there. I think Michael Penix Jr. is worthy of a top 10 pick because I watch his tape and I put it next to Caleb Williams. I put it right next to Jaden Daniels and I put it right next to Drake May and Bo Nix. And you're telling me that this guy doesn't hold his own against them? In some instances, his tape is better. Michael Penix had the best receiving core in all of college football last year, and he made sure every single one of his top 4 guys ate. Receivers love seeing that. They want to get the ball thrown to them. They want it to be distributed around, and Penix does that at an extreme level. So I think that's why the Giants, if they're lucky, they can get both Neighbors and Penix Jr. right there in the second round if he's available.
That ain't going to happen. That is not going to happen. They're not going to get Penix at 47. But let's now pivot a little bit. And let's say what happens if somebody jumps up ahead of us that has more juice, and pretty much everybody has more juice, and grabs Penix away from us. Then we can trade down into the 20s. And then if you want to shock everybody in the draft, how about this? How about you go get this guy? Listen to RG3 evaluate my guy, the guy that I would take, the guy that I've been criticizing for taking and being told I don't know anything about football because we should take Spencer Rattler at 24, 25, 26 if we can get him.
For the quarterback position, I think the steal of the draft is going to be Spencer Rattler. When you turn on this man's tape, he has arm talent out the wazoo. Go watch any of his games, but specifically go watch the Florida game and watch him make big throw after big throw. Like he never complained about the offensive line being leaky. He just found ways to make plays and get the ball to Xavier Legette, a guy that was at Oklahoma, was there because he was a big-time recruit as a five-star player, who has the arm talent, who has the accuracy, who has the pre-snap and post-snap ability, and played in a system at South Carolina that forced him to make those craved and wanted for 3-level throws that they use in the NFL off of play action. He is showing teams that the player that he was coming out of high school is actually going to translate better to him being a better pro quarterback than he ever was a college quarterback.
So you guys say I don't know football when I say that Spencer Rattler is worth the first-round pick. And if the Seahawks can't get Michael Penix, who's my first choice, they should trade down and take Spencer Rattler somewhere in the 20s because he should be there. Apparently, Robert Griffin III doesn't agree with you. He agrees with me. Have a nice day.